Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs, your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur fan podcast. We are back. We are still in the midst of the January transfer window here as we try and look towards the close of what is going to happen with Spurs and, of course, the rest of this window to come. Tottenham Hotspur still the only Premier League club to have two deals over the line, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by royalty here on the Last One on Spurs. We've had some real top journalists join us during this window. That doesn't stop. We've got more to come. I'm absolutely delighted to have back with me on Last One on Spurs. It has been a while. He is fresh, ready to go on all things Tottenham. We've got the brilliant football reporter over the Athletic. Jack Pitt-Brooke is back. Jack, how are you?
Hi, mate. I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really pleased to be back on the show.
Oh, mate, likewise. Always a pleasure, Jack. And I've got to say, it's a good timing you've made it 100% in terms of the period that you're coming back into, because there is much of a positive vibe around the club. Bearing in mind, I think we all remember where you left off. Of course, one of the View from the Lane's very, very own in Jack. I've got to ask you, Jack, before we do start, it has been an interesting window by the fact that not much has happened outside of Spurs. So maybe just to get your thoughts to begin with on that piece, that as a journalist that obviously you cover Spurs and obviously I know you've got an eye on other clubs, how strange has this window been, Jack, compared to maybe other windows that you have worked on during your time, of course, as a football reporter journalist?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I think we're used to, in most transfer windows, everyone else in the Premier League is spending money. Tottenham are struggling to get deals over the line. Tottenham fans are getting annoyed, thinking, why can't we go and get player X or player Y like the other clubs do? And this time, the shoe's on the other foot. Tottenham are the ones who've been, they signed Werner, they signed Dragosine, and the other clubs aren't really doing anything. I think it's kind of down to the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. So obviously these put a really tight limit on how much money you can lose over a 3-year spell, and teams know that these really matter now. You can't break the rules. We've seen that from the 10-point the 10-point deduction that Everton have just got. Now, if you look at how Daniel Levy's run Tottenham over the last 20 years, and I know that people have got really strongly held opinions about ENIC. I don't want to get into that, but clearly, because of the way they run the club, they've got a lot of space left within the rules, so they can continue to spend money. I guess a good way of thinking about it is Tottenham are, they're driving on a 30-mile-an-hour road, but they're only driving at 20, so they can still put their foot on the accelerator a bit. But if you look at lots of other Premier League teams, they're really driving at 29 or 30 already. They can't go any further, and there's speed cameras up now, which means they can't go over the limit. So Tottenham have actually got a bit more space to go and spend money, whereas I think all the other 19 Premier League clubs, they're trying to sell to buy, they're looking at loans, they're looking at cheap deals. And so that I think kind of explains why Tottenham have got the capacity to do a little bit more in this window than the other clubs.
That's been interesting. Again, I think, as you know, Jack, from the last few years, we've left it very, very late when it comes to getting deals over the line. Pedro Porro, that felt like an eternity, given the fact of when it was reported to when it obviously got done. And then obviously before that with Bentancur Kulusevski, Spurs have been renowned for leaving their business late. I think it's one of your own over at View from the Lane, Charlie Eccleshare, I think dug up the fact we have to go back to 2013 and Mangadi Kamalo, the last time Spurs made a January signing very, very early. So credit to Charlie for that. You have to go back to that far in the archives. Tells you everything about the fact that Ange seems to have been back this window and everyone seems in quite a good place around Spurs. Now, it's a great time to bring you on, Jack, because we are just past the halfway mark of the Premier League season. And despite the injury and suspension list, and not to mention now as we find the international absences Ange had to deal with, which at times, given all those three factors, they've been into double figures, I've got to say. Ange's makeshift Spurs team currently find themselves 8 points off the top of the table, only sitting 3 points off third place Arsenal and fourth place Aston Villa, respectively. We have, of course, that mouth-watering FA Cup tie to look forward to against City. We know you're there. We're going to get your thoughts on that. But I have to ask you overall, Jack, what you have made of Ange's start to life at Spurs, given the fact that, again, look at the summer, Jack. Harry Kane, the poster boy, is sold. All the drama around, of course, the summer itself and the search for the manager. How has Ange done, in your opinion, so far?
I think he's done really, really well. I think he's done really the first thing that he was asked to do, which is he's changed the squad. He's got rid of a lot of the old guys who've been there for a while. He's instituted a new style of play. He's got, which the fans love and which everybody buys into throughout the players. And he's really changed the whole feel around the club. He's changed the momentum. He's changed the energy. So for me, that was the most important thing that he had to do this season, and he's done it. Now, in terms of results, I think it was always going to be really hard to get consistent results this season because he was going to have to bring in half a new team. He's going to have to teach them to play a new style of football. He's going to have to, say goodbye to Kane, Lloris, Dyer, etc., which he's done. But I actually think results have been pretty good. I thought they started really, really well. They've obviously had a bit of a dip recently. I actually think, to be honest, I think they've had more of a dip in terms of performances than in terms of results. They had that bad run after the Chelsea game, but since then, they've been grinding out wins. I actually don't think they played that well for months, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think that's understandable because of the number of players they've had half a team missing for the last 3 months, basically. So yeah, I think really good on terms of ethos, ahead of schedule in terms of results and performances, and to be honest, a lot more to come because they've got Maddison to come back, Son, Sarr, Bissouma. They've got the Dragasine and Werner to settle in. I think they could actually be looking pretty good by the back end of the season. And I'm not going to make a prediction for how they'll finish yet, but I think I think that they're certainly on track. Let's put it that way.
Georgia, I got a really tricky question that you may not want to answer, but I will ask you it, and feel free if you don't want to comment on it. Do you feel, had Spurs not lost those players after that Chelsea game, they would be closer to the top? Because the feeling around the club up until the Chelsea game was, this is unbelievable what we're watching, what we're seeing, the way the players are connecting, the actual atmosphere, the vibes at the stadium. You've been there. It is like a nightclub. Do you feel Spurs had kept their players fit up until and before and after that Chelsea game? Would we be talking about Spurs maybe potentially in a title race and not a top 4 battle? I mean, they're 8 points off at the moment. What do you feel for you?
Well, they'd definitely be better because any team would be like the amazing thing to me this season is how from minute one, James Maddison was like the most important player on that team.
Yep.
He was he really assumed that responsibility. He ran the game on the pitch. He was vice captain, very vocal around the place. Clearly, they would have been better if they had Maddison in the team and if he hadn't injured his ankle in that game. I think they would have been better if Van der Ven hadn't done his hamstring. I think they'd always be better with Romero in the team, better with the doggy, better with Bissouma, better with Sarr, better with Son. So I think it's obvious they'd be better. What we don't know is how many more points would they get because, points and performances and points don't correlate perfectly. Sometimes you can play well and lose and sometimes you play badly and win. But I think it's probably safe to say that they would be in a better position if they'd had all those players.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, again, I think many fans it's hard, isn't it? That period where they did go on the streak of 3 games without a win, I think many were waiting to see what's going to happen. Can Spurs respond back from that adversity? And to be fair, like you've said, Jack, although I do agree that I don't think we yet to see a full 90-minute performance as a whole. I think Newcastle saw a good 60 minutes there. I think the exciting thing is that many pick up on the fact is that we're yet to see the best of Spurs. And that's an exciting thing because when you think about all those players that you've listed to come back, it does have a potential to have a really good second half of the season that we know you've said numerous times on View from the Lane. Now, look, Spurs have become once again renowned with that tack of being the entertainers. They do play the style and a swagger in periods. And, again, when you consider the fact, as we've touched upon, Jack, they have been riddled with injuries. And when you consider the fact we've had at times the likes of Son, Sarr missing, Bissouma, and then you look at, suspensions, Udogie, Romero, again, Bissouma, Kulusevski. I'm really intrigued to know what you've made of the fact of how Ange has navigated through that period, given the fact that, I don't want to keep mentioning this. Obviously, I know Jose Mourinho, and you guys had a segment in your show recently. There's the argument of can Jose Mourinho go on to actually get another top job amongst the elite? And I remember Jose when he was here in that period where I think Son broke his arm and he was almost weighing up saying, we're going to have to sacrifice aim to actually have a chance in the following one. And it was almost like a defeatist attitude going into the next game. But the great thing about Ange is that I don't know any game this season that I've gone into not believing that we could get a result and win. And that's because the manager gives you that sense of belief that there is no excuse. There is no reason to not turn up. Every player in that team, in that squad should have the ultimate belief we can get a result. So I'm really intrigued to know how you've always navigated that period and that belief amongst fans now that Spurs can go to Man City, can go to Man United and actually be disappointed to not come away with all 3 points.
Yeah, it's been really, really good. I really like the way he hasn't taken excuses. He doesn't complain about the injuries. He doesn't give, he doesn't give the players an excuse. I often think in football, if a manager starts blaming injuries and the players, that feeds through to the players and the players think, oh, we've got an excuse if we lose, then they take their foot off the gas. But that's not really happened at all under Ange. He's still been really positive. He's stuck to his guns. He's stuck to his ethos. And I think you can feel that kind of filtering through the squad. It's obviously been really tough because, for the way he plays, he needs Romero and Van der Ven because they're brilliant on the ball and they're quick and they can play high up the pitch and give Tottenham the basis to play how they want to play. It's also really important to have Maddison because they're a creative, Tottenham are a creative team who want to have the ball. They want to, play through the thirds, and Maddison is by a million miles their best player at doing that. And I actually think it's been harder to replace Maddison than it has been to replace the centre backs. Emerson and Davis have done a pretty good job at centre back, but nobody can do what Maddison does. I know they've tried Kulusevski there, who I think has done pretty well. Lo Celso's had a few good moments. They brought in Højbjerg, who's done okay, but it's not really his game. So I think they have done really well. I think, to me, the most important game in this was actually that 3-3 draw at City, just because they'd lost 3 on the spin before then. They were going to City, who were in pretty good form. They didn't have Maddison. They didn't have the centre-backs. Brian Gill started, who's not, wouldn't be in any, tries his best, but he wouldn't be in anybody's first-choice Spurs team. And they got a 3-3 draw. And I know people will say that, the next game they lost to West Ham. But I do think that the fact they got that point at City in a game where people would have expected them probably to get battered, I wonder if that kind of did something for belief. It kind of told people that, in fact, this is the Tottenham team that even without 3 of their most important players, they can continue to go and get results. So I have been really impressed with not just, like I said a second ago, it's not that I think the performances in the last 3 months have been that good, because I don't. But I think the results and the togetherness the squad have shown and the commitment to trying to play the Ange ball, even without some of the most important players, that's what's really, really impressed me. I think really puts Tottenham in good stead.
Yeah, I do agree on that. Again, what's quite interesting is that from the media perspective, I find it interesting because, again, for those that are outside of Spurs, some may feel that Ange can be fairly prickly at times. And I think, again, when he's getting results, everyone sees Ange as almost this kind of cuddly teddy bear that can't do any wrong. So I'm intrigued to know from you, Jack, what you've made from a media perspective, because what really feels apparent to us is when we watch the press conferences on YouTube, whether we get those links to them, is that essentially doesn't really like being asked the same question twice, doesn't like being basically questioned in regards to injuries, because as we've seen in the last few presses that he'll be very guarded on that, and suddenly Bentancur turns up, or Kulusevski's turned up, Sessegnon has turned up even. So I'm really intrigued to know what that's like from a journalist perspective, that it can be quite hard to get information out from him, and also the fact, again, you've got to be on your toes and be ready that, don't ask the same question twice.
Well, I think as a journalist, it's good because he's really candid. He gives you really, he tells you what he thinks about stuff. He has, he's obviously a very smart guy. He's got very strongly held opinions. He's very honest about his opinions. He doesn't hold back. He doesn't kind of mince words. So he's very straight talking. So I think as a journalist, if you go to a press conference, you want to hear some opinions. And I know that I think a big part of that is also language. Being a native English speaker, obviously, it kind of puts him in a stronger position than some managers who maybe don't feel quite so confident expressing themselves in English. So he's very candid, and that's great. Obviously, I think a few people have picked up on the fact that sometimes Spurs players who, were not expected to be fit miraculously get fit in that brief time between the pre-match press conference and the match. And I think you can infer from that Ange likes to keep his cards close to his chest when it comes to injuries. I don't think he particularly wants to give the opposition the advantage of knowing which player is going to be fit or not for any given game. I think as a manager, that's probably his right to do that. I think ultimately in modern football, it's difficult to completely control that flow of information because stuff gets out. People hear things about who might be fit or who might be injured at any given point. Also, as anyone who's on social media will know, he can be a bit dismissive of questions that he doesn't like. And, different journalists will have different views on that. Personally, I don't mind it because I think it kind of adds a bit of, texture and honesty and candor to the whole conversation. But you're also right, Ricky, to say that Spurs fans love him. So whatever, anyone criticizing Ange for any of this on social media is going to get shouted at by millions of Tottenham fans on Twitter. So I'm certainly not going to be brave enough to speak out and criticize Ange. I mean, look,
Yeah.
all told, I think people. I just think I think he's a smart, interesting guy,
Yep.
and he's just very good at using the media. You know, I think people, I think people sometimes get the wrong end of the stick with Ange and think he's like the nicest bloke in the world, or like you use the word cuddly. I don't. I think he's canny. I
Mm.
think he's a canny, experienced football manager who's been around the block and he's managed in
Yep.
very difficult situations all around the world in lots of different environments, and he knows how to handle himself in a media environment, and he's good at getting his points across, and he tries to get some points across, and he tries to play his cards close to his chest and other things. So yeah, certainly an interesting guy to deal with. I'm looking forward to covering him more.
You know, it's funny, Jack. I have to remind myself this is his first Premier League job, or even first job in England, because the way, like you say, he does obviously back himself. Is that it feels like he's been here for a while? Do you not feel that? I mean, it's hard to believe this is just his. Obviously, I know he was down in Scotland, so you got a feel of the British side of football. But is that still again a reminder that he's only still fairly newish into British football, English football, etc.?
Yeah, I think that just points to the slightly unusual pathway that he's had to get to this point, because he's
Yep.
very experienced. He's in, I think he's 57. So he's been managing in football for a long time with an awful lot of success, in all sorts of different places, which is fantastic. But this is his first job in England. And I think generally we're more used, I think in Europe, in top level European football, we're more used to a situation where, somebody will retire at 35-ish, then
Yep.
they'll go into coaching, and then they'll be getting big jobs from minute one, whether it's, I don't know, Guardiola or Arteta or Conte or Pochettino, slightly I guess to a lesser extent, like Klopp.
Yeah.
Lots of these guys went straight in from playing for big European clubs to managing big European clubs,
Yeah.
and so we're kind of used to coaches who are more sort of who spent their whole life working in this environment, and so it's a slightly different environment that Postecoglou's come through. But I think maybe that kind of different pathway that he's had has really worked for him. It's given him a lot of perspective. It's allowed him to kind of see the world outside the Premier League bubble, because I do think the Premier League is a bubble, and I think in English football we're all guilty, I think, of being a little bit maybe ignorant or dismissive about stuff that exists
Yeah, it's
outside the
very true.
bubble. And
Very
the
true.
same when Wenger got the Arsenal job, having come
Yep.
in for having previously managed a Japanese club, and people were a bit dismissive of him then. There's no, it's the same game in England and Japan. It's the same game in England and Australia or anywhere else. So I think as a whole in this country we have been a bit dismissive, but I do think his experiences probably put him in good stead to have that bit of extra perspective and judgment to take into the Tottenham job.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, what I think is fascinating as well, Jack, is that you look at the kind of profile of players that he's gone for. And I think Ali actually asked him this in one of the pressers, that has he deliberately gone for players that have either maybe suffered relegation or gone for a down period in their careers respectively. And Ange answered and said, no, it's not really the case, which I found quite interesting, because there seems to be really a character behind every player that he brings in. There's something very special, I feel, that with
Yeah, so I think character is really, really
they've
important to him.
got to support it. I think sorry, that's my internet there. I was saying with relation to Vicario, where Vicario would said he'd walk over broken glass to come and sign for the club in the summer. Dragoshin coming in and picking Spurs over Bayern Munich. That would be completely really unheard of him. And I know the fact that, again, you look at the nuances in that, it's a case of maybe game time would have been one of the most key critical factors in that. But it just feels like, Jack, he's really identified the right kind of profile of players to bring in. And I've got to say that for the first time in a long, long time, I know many Spurs fans feel the same as well on this, that such a likeable team now, Jack, such a likeable squad, that when you go through the players now, you feel such a real sense of a connection as fans with those players now that we haven't felt in a long, long time, Jack. Do you get that feeling as well as a journalist, that there's such a likeable feeling about this squad at the moment?
Yeah, so Ange did a really good interview with Rio Ferdinand for BT Sport. Oh, sorry, TNT Sports, I should say, the other week for Rio's it's called Between the Lines series. And I think he was talking about this, and he was talking about the importance of character. And I think from memory, I only watched this the other day. I think from memory, the point Andrew's making is that the difference at the top level, the difference in quality between players is actually quite small. Like between I don't know, the best player in the market one position, the second best player in the market. Like, you know, there's not a huge gulf in class there, but there might be a much bigger gap in character between different players you're looking at in the transfer market. And he's clearly spoken about how, and he was talking to Rio about this, about how important it is for him to get the right characters into Tottenham, like players who really, really want to be there. You know, he makes a point of, if Tottenham are going to sign someone, he gives them a call. He kind of looks for their motivations and sees, you know, why do they want to play for Tottenham? Do they want to come here for the right reasons? Do they want to buy into what we're trying to do? And I think that's really, really important to him. And I think it's really shown in the guys that he signed. You know, to me, the two standouts are Maddison, who I think is a brilliant character. He's kind of funny and outgoing and confident. He loves the game. He's a real student of the game. He's also, because he's got this natural confidence and charisma, I think leadership comes to him easily. I think it's incredibly telling he was given the vice captaincy before he'd even kicked a competitive ball for Tottenham. You know, that really speaks volumes about his importance around the place. And Vicario, who, I mean, to be honest, I think most people listening to this wouldn't have heard of Vicario. I hadn't heard of Vicario when he was playing for Empoli. I mean, because I think, like a lot of people, we all thought, are they going to pay the 40 million for David Raya or not?
Yeah,
that's what we were thinking in kind of May and early June. Then it became clear they were going to spend 40 million on Raya, and people were getting frustrated, like, well, why won't Levy go and spend the 40 million on Raya? And then for what, half of that money, they go out and get this guy people haven't heard of. And he's incredible. Like, he's a brilliant goalkeeper. He's got like the kind of Lloris reflexes and shot stopping, as well as the sort of modern Edison style, coming off his line, using his feet. So I think he's kind of the complete package. But he's also just a really, really smart, interesting guy. You know, I know the staff at Tottenham love him. He speaks perfect English. He's incredibly good with the kids, like, as in, you know, not just the lads in Tottenham's academy, but also, you know, the club's community projects and so on. So I think he's a brilliant character and the kind of character that you need in the dressing room. So clearly character has been really, really important to Tottenham. Like, I get the impression that's what Van der Ven's like. Personally, I've never met Van der Ven, so I don't want to talk too much about what he's like. But everything I've heard is that he's a really, really impressive guy, very smart, very humble, very thoughtful, very dedicated to his football. And I do think that that's kind of what you need in a club. You know, you need characters who are pushing in the right direction. You need characters who are on the same page and want to achieve the same things. You know, that's what Tottenham had 10 years ago when Mauricio Pochettino got the job. And, you know, he managed to, you know, the circumstances weren't exactly the same, but he managed to, you know, mold a group of individuals into a team and get them all pulling in the same direction and believing in him, and everyone was buying into it, you know, the players and the fans and everything. And I think what's so promising about Ange so far is that it looks like he's trying to recreate that sense of unity and that sense of momentum that they had in the start of the Pochettino era.
I think also interesting, Jack, is the way in which Porro, for example, how much he's improved under Ange's stewardship so far. I mean, given the fact that I think you might have been off at the time on paternity leave, but when we had that horrendous game away at Leicester last season, the 4-1, Maddison, of course, scoring. Maddison seems to always score against us, but Porro had a particularly terrible debut. Yeah. And I always said, don't judge a player on a first appearance, because we've had several players that haven't always started off very well and then gradually got on to actually have a really good Spurs career. And I think Porro and Udogie, two of them, Jack, I mean, not sure there's too many better fullbacks, wing-backs actually in the Premier League right now that are just literally running it, aren't they? I mean, it's a joy to watch them both. And again, when you add into that Van der Ven, Romero, that in those first 5 games together, they don't even concede the foul, let alone a goal. And then also overall the way they have played when they were together. And that, again, is the shame when we lost them after the Chelsea game. It was that obviously frustration that to lose 1, but 2. Dragoshin coming in as well now. I mean, it's quite a formidable defence they've got now, Jack, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Porro and Udogie have been amazing this year. Like, again, you know, I'd be lying if I said I watched a lot of Udogie when he was at Udinese. But I think he must be one of the best left backs in the world. Like, the way, or at least he's got the potential to be one of the best left backs in the world. If you think of what he's asked to do, you know, he's good defensively. He's good at coming inside and, you know, helping Tottenham build up to the middle of the pitch. He's good at making those kind of forward underlapping runs, maybe inside the left winger, to get down to the byline and then be an extra body in the box, pull the ball back for someone to score a goal. So he's got like a difficult job to do. And I think he has been phenomenal. Like, he's kind of come from nowhere for me. And the great thing about Porro, that's why I love Porro this season, is he was written off last season. Like, he came in and people said, oh, he's only signed, he only knows how to play as a wing back. He doesn't know how to play in a back four. He was obviously tried out in a back four in the Newcastle United away game, which was a disaster. They lost 6-1. Porro got absolutely shredded. And again, people were killing him, so probably me included, saying, he doesn't know how to defend. He can't defend the four. He's only going to survive for as long as Tottenham play a wing back system, all that stuff. And, he copped so much stick last season, Porro. And then this year he comes in and it turns out he can play in a four. And actually he's doing something very different from what he's ever done in his career before. He was never playing as this kind of like Guardiola style fullback / midfielder like he is now. When he was at Sporting, he would just play very, very high and wide, just attack, basically running towards the corner flag, getting crosses in. So it's a very, very different game that he's being asked to play. And he's been incredible. Like his use of the ball is brilliant. His shooting, that game, I mean, if we're honest, that game against Burnley the other week was an awful game. He scored an incredible goal. And also he saved his teammates from having to go to a replay at Turf Moor, which is what they would have had to done if it'd been 0-0, which meant they wouldn't have got the time off last week. So that was hugely important. I think I really respect Porro this season because it can't have been easy for him coming into Tottenham in the middle of last season, thrown straight into the Premier League. To be honest, a team that's playing really badly. Manager doesn't want to be there. Fans don't like the manager. Really bad. It must have been it was a horrible atmosphere last season. It can't be an easy place to come and play football. And he's getting tons and tons of stick. And in fact, he's turned it around. He's proven that he can do stuff that people didn't think he could do. And he's turned into one of Tottenham's player of the season. So I think he might even be my Tottenham player of the season, Porro.
Yeah, he's been incredible. And I think, what's really, struck a chord, Jack, is that how important a Postecoglou preseason is. I think that's so important. I mean, one player that I think we're yet to see the best out of that I know is currently split an opinion is Brennan Johnson. And I think the guy's already still had about 4 assists and he got a goal so far. It's hard because what does 50, 60 million actually buy you these days? This is the problem, is it? When you get a price like that, there's such an expectancy on a player that I feel that's another one there that I think, he could have really benefited from a full preseason under Ange. Again, bought on, the final day of the August window, the summer window. Really hard then to obviously then find your way into the team, in and out to some degree. I mean, I think he has played about 10 or 11 games now in a row. And you just hope with the more games he plays, the more he will start to obviously adapt and become integral to that Postecoglou side. But what I do want to ask you about is the key internal appointments Spurs have made. Now, look, we've not had the pleasure of having you on over the last year. And, Spurs have made, as I've said, those integral appointments behind the scenes. That really now seems to be part of the reason why things are particularly flourishing when it comes to the recruitment and the on-field success. When I talk about the actual getting of results. Now, we've seen Scott Munn obviously start as the role of a CEO. That's under the new club's data-led recruitment team of technical director Johan Langer. We've got chief scout in there, Rob McKenzie. Sorry, guys, I'm back. Flickering internet here. We know strategy is still cooking in the background. The question I'm trying to ask, Jack, is essentially, what have you made of that recruitment team and how things have worked so far when it comes to the summer and the January winners, respectively, for you?
Yeah, I think the recruitment's been really good. I think the recruitment in the 2022-23 season wasn't so good, to be honest. But I think the recruitment, I didn't feel that good at the time. They spent too much money on Perisic. They probably spent too much money on Richarlison. Bissouma didn't, he's been good this season, didn't really do much last season. Maybe you can pin that on Conte, maybe you can pin that on the player. Spence, obviously, not really done anything for Tottenham. Longley didn't really do much, but he's only on loan. Whereas this season, I think the recruitment's been much better. Maddison, big success. Vicario, big success. Van der Ven, big success. The three that really, really stand out. Johnson, I think we'll have to wait and see. He's just the kid. I kind of disagree with what you said about Johnson a second ago. I think he's played too much. I think when Tottenham, signed him, it wouldn't have been their intention for him to play, 12 games on the spin. Right, I think he's had to play all these games because obviously Perisic is out for the season and now left the club. Yep. Solomon has seemingly has had quite a bad injury. Kulusevski's had to get moved back into midfield. And they haven't really replaced Harry Kane. So they've been in a position where they've had to play Johnson a lot. And I think he could probably, I think watching him, I think he could probably do with a break. I really like I think he makes really good runs. I think he's got a really good attitude. I think he's lacking confidence in the final third, which is understandable.
Yeah.
But I think maybe if he has a bit of a break and then he can come back in, then hopefully we'll see a sort of slightly sharper Johnson back end of the season. But in terms of how the recruitment works, sorry,
go for it.
In terms of how the recruitment works, I think it's been good. It's obviously been a really tough summer because they didn't have a recruitment team. They had to do a transfer window without a recruitment team. I think Langer got the job in early October, unless I'm wrong. So really in the summer, it was, the people who were left from the previous era. Obviously, Paratici was still around to advise Daniel Levy. I think they made a really good fist of it in the circumstances. Like I said, Madison, brilliant signing. Vicario, brilliant signing. Van der Ven, brilliant signing. Now, in the January window, things are a bit more settled. I think now that Tottenham have got a solid recruitment team in place with Langer and McKenzie, both of whom I think are they're really popular. They're really highly regarded in the industry. McKenzie, especially, obviously, someone who worked at Tottenham before a few years ago. I think we might well see Paratici take a slightly backward step now, or rather he's kind of less important because Tottenham have got their own recruitment team. They might need Paratici's consultancy a bit less, although I don't know, right. Tottenham, how exactly that's going to play out. Clearly, Dragostin, for example, is somebody who Fabio initially found in Romania and signed him for Juventus about 5 years ago, when Paratici was running Juventus, whereas the Werner deal I think was more driven by Tottenham permanent staff rather than Fabio. So it remains to be seen how things will work in future. I'd be very interested to see how Tottenham operate next summer, for example. But overall, I think they're doing pretty well in recruitment. I think, given how bad Tottenham's recruitment was for a long time, I think the last few years the recruitment has actually been pretty good.
I'm intrigued to ask you, Jack, because again, this question is asked a lot. When there's a good deal done by Tottenham, many feel Daniel Levy's had no involvement. When things aren't going very well, it's because Daniel is involved. That's just a feeling that Spurs fans, some of them, not all of them, seem to have. I'm intrigued to ask you, Jack, how involved do you feel Daniel is still in relation to transfer windows, given the fact, as you said there is a new recruitment team in place? Do you feel he's still got a heavy involvement?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be kind of different from deal to deal. I do think, the first thing to say is he's probably quite unique in football and being the chairman who also, really runs the football club, runs things associated with the football club, like the stadium project, for example, hiring and firing of managers, recruitment as well. He's a very detail-oriented person, Daniel Levy, and he really likes to be involved in that day-to-day running the club. There have been times, in the last few years where, he's looked like taking a step back for a bit. For example, when Fabio came in summer 2021, the idea was that Daniel Levy would take a bit of a step back and allow Fabio to run the football side of the club. But I think, nothing happens in Tottenham without Daniel Levy say so. I'm sure he is still involved in maybe not so much in football decisions, because he likes, those should be left to football people, but certainly in negotiations and trying to get things done. I believe he was, involved in the completion of the Dragostin deal very late at night a few weeks ago, up until 3 a.m. trying to get that one over the line. So yeah, ultimately he is always very involved, and I think in terms of assessing Daniel, I know you said some people think if it's good, it's nothing to do with Levy, and if it's bad, it's to do with him. I think that there's some stuff. There are some things he's been really good at, and one of them clearly is, the financial health of the club and putting Tottenham in a really stable position. I think he's made a lot of bad decisions in the last 5 years, but I think if you look at the Postecoglou appointment, maybe that suggests to me that he's learned from some of those mistakes, and he's gone back towards finding a manager who's the right fit for the club and what the type of football that the fans want to see and the values of the football club. Because I think he did, and I think he's kind of admitted this as well in public, Daniel Levy. He did kind of lose sight of the values of the football club a little bit when he went for Conte Mourinho. I think he was maybe a little bit too interested in just appointing a really famous manager. And I think that's not really what Tottenham needed at the time, even though that's the direction that Daniel Levy took them in from 2019 through to 2023.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Jack. I mean, again, that was the point I do find is funny is that, again, it's just an online thing I find that, when things aren't going with regards to a transfer. Daniel's been involved, and when things haven't gone as such, it's Daniel. But again, he has been behind some of the influential transfers Spurs have got over the line. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And when people want to dress that up, it is what it is. Now, in terms of the contractual situation at Spurs, we've seen obviously Pat Matassar agree a new long-term contract with the club. That was then slowly followed by Destiny Udogie as well. I'm intrigued to ask you, Jack. Sonny has only got a couple of years left. We're going to come on to Antonio Nusa in a second. There has been talk that maybe Nusa, again, he's a very, very young kid, but does he have the potential to be that successor to Son in years ahead? Again, very, very young player, very, very talented. I just wonder where we are with Son in terms of his contractual situation. And when you add to that, I think we look at Lo Celso, Bentancur, Basuma. Those guys are also around the 2 to 3 year mark. Can you see Spurs, maybe once the window closes, looking to get these contracts even further adjusted in terms of extended?
Yeah, so I don't know the ins and outs of the Son situation at the moment, but I'm sure that the club, he's the captain. He's been brilliant this season after having a difficult season last year. I'm sure they would want to get him tied down. In terms of the other players, I mean, look, clearly at the moment, Tottenham are working really hard behind the scenes to make sure that all the players who they see as their future are secured to long-term deals. And traditionally, this is something Tottenham's been really good at, has been offering their good young players new deals very frequently, even when they've got a lot of time left on their old deals, just to make sure that their future is always safe and secure for a long period of time. That they'll offer a small amount, a little bit more money every time, so the player's happy to re-sign. And then Tottenham, and this is, if you think back to like the sort of first 3 years, maybe the Pochettino era, Tottenham were doing this all the time with great success. Now, of those players you just mentioned, I don't think all the situations are the same. I mean, like Bentancur is definitely going to be in the Spurs team for the next few years, so I'm sure he would get a long-term new deal. Would Lo Celso get a new deal? I don't know. I think the jury's out on that one. I actually quite like Lo Celso relative to lots of Spurs fans. Lots of Spurs fans don't have him at all. I actually think he's a really good player who, for whatever reason, it's not really worked at Tottenham for him so far. But I don't think they'll be throwing new deals at these players left, right, and centre, because it's not really the right. Just don't think they'll do that. But I think that some of those players, like Bentancur, are the type of player they will want to get tied down.
Yeah. The other thing about Lo Celso for me, Jack, I do agree he's a talented player, but I think Spurs got this massive problem where just can't keep him fit. And I think that is such a big problem for Ange because, fingers crossed Spurs are going to be playing some form of European football next season. If you can't have him, in the period where he can play one every 2-3 games, that's a big, big problem. And for all the talent, I just wonder whether the fact of Lo Celso that when he started at Spurs, he actually performed really, really well, earning that, of course, permanent move. And there's definitely a player in there 100%. But the fact of the matter is that I really have concerns over his fitness. And when you factor into that as well, the style Spurs play, the intensity that they play at, I really worry about Lo Celso long term. If that, again, we see a situation over the contract, whether that is a definitive factor as to whether they would offer him a new one. You see where I'm coming from on that?
Yeah, I think the problem is look, Tottenham need a backup to Maddison. Because
they do. Yes.
They need someone who can play in that kind of number 8 role, who can move the ball forward, pass the ball forward, create chances for his teammates. And Lo Celso is the best backup to Maddison they've got. The problem is, if you're going to be back up to Maddison, you need to be fit. Like, you need to be available all the time. And you can't have a situation where your backup to James Maddison is also injured. Because it means if Maddison gets injured and the backup's injured, then you don't have a backup. So I think this is why I think, this is why I think I'm not sure whether I see Lo Celso's future as that Maddison backup, because I'm not sure it really works for Tottenham to have somebody trying to be the backup who isn't fit all the time. So I don't know. I mean, look, the fact is, if the economic situation in European football was different, they would have sold him, because he's obviously a really good player. He's done pretty well. He did pretty well out on loan, but nobody in La Liga's got enough money to buy him. And so I don't know what's going to happen with the economic situation in European football this year, but I don't think I still think that long term it's likely that he will leave and that he will stay.
Right. Yeah. Again, interesting on that one. Jack, obviously we knew the priority as it was in the final weeks of the summer window was, of course, to bring in another centre back, a player that could play in and around the front three. You'd say they've now done those two positions, given Dragashin's come through and Timo Werner's come through the door. Just wondering between now and the end of the deadline, and look at us being greedy looking to see if there's a third one coming in. Any other positions, Jack, you feel Spurs might look to try and identify and source between now and the end of the window, in your opinion?
Well, it kind of depends who you believe. So, one theory that I heard at the start of the window is Tottenham. There were three things that Tottenham wanted. It was they wanted a centre back, they wanted somebody who could play in the front line, and they wanted a number 8. Now, the view from Tottenham is more that there was one priority, which was a centre back, and then anything else beyond that was a bonus, like Werner. So I think it's safe to say they're interested, or they have been interested in getting another number 8 in, but it's not really clear. It's not like it's not a huge priority. And I guess the question is, what sort of a midfielder do they want? Do they want a young player who they can who they can buy for quite big money and build around for the future, basically like the Dragosine deal for a midfielder, and that would be Conor Gallagher, I think, someone like that. Or do they just want a short-term option like the Werner deal? Do they just want to take a loan or a short-term or like an older player who's a bit more experienced? So I think a lot of it hinges on what sort of midfielder does Tottenham want, not just in terms of playing profile, but also in terms of kind of age and transfer profile, whether they want to make a big investment now, whether they can make a big investment now, or in fact, whether they just want an extra body in the door.
Again, I think where we are at the moment with regards to the latest updates, Jack, is that Spurs seem to have a very keen interest in regards to Antonio Nusa, the Norwegian wonder kid. I mean, you tell me what you think there. It appears similar to the way the deals were constructed for Destiny Adogi, Pat Matasar, is that essentially Spurs will allow the player to stay at obviously that parent club, Club Brugge, and then join us in the summer. What do you make of him as a player, Jack? Is that one that should excite fans? Tell us a bit about him and if you feel this move could potentially happen this window.
Yeah, so this is something that's really developed over the last week or so. So he's one of the most talented young players in the Belgian league. He's been playing for Club Brugge. He is a kind of very dribbly, fast winger, great on 1v1. I've seen some people compare him to Jeremy Doku, who also started off in Belgium before going to France and is obviously now at Manchester City and has done tremendously well for Manchester City this season. Personally, I haven't seen Nusa play a lot, so I can't really talk in detail about him. I can just go on what I've heard from people who are more expert in Belgian football. I think the idea, it sounds, is more like he's kind of one for the future, as in maybe someone to buy and then perhaps loan back to Club Brugge. But clearly he's very, very highly rated. Tons of scouts go over to Bruges to watch him play. Chelsea were obviously linked with him last summer. So I do think he's clearly like one of the talents in European football. And it's interesting that if Tottenham think that they want a new winger for next season, I think that's really interesting because it shows that they're still committed to upgrading the squad, getting more young players in, even though they've got Johnson. They want another option in that front line to keep the team moving forwards.
Yeah. Again, one probably keep an eye on, Jack, between now and in a month. Want to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, clearly something is happening behind the scenes there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they. I wouldn't want to make a prediction about what sort of a deal they will reach, if any, this window. Right. But clearly there is something going on there.
Okay. So also going on with regards to potentially Emerson Royale's future. Now, up until this point yesterday, it appeared that Al Nassr had a real strong interest in, as we said, Emerson Royale, and the potential was they were going to come back with a further bid. We have heard reports today, and just to date and time check this, we're recording this here on the 23rd of January at 2:45 in the afternoon. We've heard reports, Jack, that Al Nassr are potentially looking to switch their attention from Emerson Royale to Man United fullback Aaron Wan-Bissaka. I'm wondering for you what you make of those links and in favour of letting Emerson Royale go if a huge amount of money came, given the fact that Spurs don't actually have, I believe, adequate cover there if they were to let Emerson Royale leave. And that's a player that's played really across the whole back line from Spurs, from left back to centre back to right back. He's very much been, and I don't take this disrespectfully, he's been the utility guy, Jack, hasn't he, this season at Tottenham?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I agree with you. I think if they get a lot of money on the table, then I can see why it would be attractive. But I think they need him. He's played tons of football this season. He's not just been a squad player. He's been in the first team a lot of the time.
6 of the last 10, Jack, he's featured in, which tells you everything about how important he's been.
Like, he's the backup. I mean, look, I think Tottenham have been lucky that Porro is one of the few players who hasn't got injured this season. Yeah, he's played almost every game, and he works so hard. Clearly he must be an incredibly good shape, or either that or very lucky, or both, because he hasn't got injured. And obviously, if he got injured, who's going to play right back? It'd have to be Royale. And now, obviously, they have used Royale a lot in centre back as a kind of deputy to Romero, who's had various red cards and a hamstring injury of his own. Now they've got Dragusin in. Maybe they don't need Royale quite so much as a backup to Romero, but I do think they need him as a backup to Porro. And I think it would be crazy if they sold him to Saudi Arabia now, and then let's say hypothetically Porro gets a hamstring injury against Brentford, which stranger things have happened, and it's the last day of the window, and then Tottenham don't have a backup right back, and then they're who plays right back for the last 4 months of the season. So I'm not saying it won't happen, but I think if they did it, I think they would need a right back coming in who could be the deputy for Porro for the second half of the season, because the last thing they're going to want is not having a right back for the second half of the season.
Feels very similar, Jack, to the Davinson Sanchez situation, although the difference is I think many felt Sanchez needed to move. And of course, again, when you look in hindsight, Spurs are leaving themselves incredibly short where they picked up that flurry of injuries. And we were quite literally, Jack, battling through to January to buy a centre-back. So, look, we'll keep an eye and see what happens there with relation to Emerson Royale's future. But as we understand, look, it appears maybe El Nasser have turned their head towards Aaron Wan-Bissaka. But look, we shall see. I'm intrigued to ask you, Jack, we spoke about Werner, the fact that he's made a decent start so far to his life at Spurs. Of course, an assist already in his first game. I also wonder what you think about Richarlison, Jack, because there were strong rumours a few months ago that Saudi clubs may be calling for Richie. But given the fact that he has had 6 goals in his last 6 Premier League games, do you feel there's every chance, Jack, Richie will probably be a Spurs player in the summer? Or do you think it's very much a case of wait and see what the second half of the season brings?
I would say wait and see what the second half of the season brings. I know he's had a really good run recently. I think he's got, 6 in his last 6 in the league. So that's his best goal-scoring run since he's been at Tottenham, and that's great because they need him right now. With Son away in the Asian Cup, Tottenham needs somebody who can score goals because there's not really enough goals elsewhere in the team at the moment. To be honest, just speaking hypothetically, but if Tottenham could make their money back on Richarlison in the summer, my guess is that they might want to. I don't think his goal return. I mean, look, they paid 50 million quid for him in 2022, plus an extra 10 million of add-ons. So that's a lot of money, and I don't really think he scored enough goals to justify that so far. And I know that Tottenham fans like him, and I think everyone likes him. He's got a great attitude. He plays with his heart on his sleeve. People really respond to him well, and that's great. And I like watching him play. He's a fun player to watch. But I think in terms of production, I don't think the numbers really justify the outlay at this point. But I don't know. He could go on a great run the second half of the season and score a lot of goals, and then suddenly Tottenham think they really need him for next year. I definitely think they definitely need someone who can play as a number 9, who can hold the ball up, who can give you a slightly different type of threat from what you can get from Sonny. So I can understand why. I can obviously see the value in Richarlison, but I think I'd have to say wait and see on what will happen in the summer. And of course, what we also don't know is how much money will the Saudi League have. I don't think the Saudi League will continue for the next few years to spend as much money as they spent in the last year or so, and so it might be that the offers aren't really there. But I think I'd be lying if I said I was very confident he'd be a Spurs player for the next 3 seasons.
Okay, I mean we've got a slight midfield dilemma at the moment, Jack, by the fact that this rumour links towards Conor Gallagher won't go away. And the fact that Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, for as much as a professional that he is, I feel that he desperately wants to play first-team football. So I'll try and ask you a common question combined on them both. How likely is it, do you feel, Conor Gallagher will leave Chelsea this window and potentially come to Spurs? And in relation to Højbjerg, how likely do you feel it is that he'll get a move, given the fact that, look, he is professional, he gives his everything. We've called it a nightclub there. But he is, quite frankly, the first off the dance floor, given the fact that as soon as the game ends, he does go straight down the tunnel. But he does give his all. So really interested to know what your thoughts are on those 2 players' futures.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think on Gallagher, if I was to bet, I would bet that he would stay at Chelsea. I just think, look, he's obviously Chelsea are in a bit of a pickle, aren't they? Because he's got 18 months left in his contract, and he's been there. I think they've certainly thought about selling it. They've thought pretty seriously about selling him in the past.
Right.
But he's been their best midfielder this season. And I imagine that Chelsea would have expected that Enzo Fernandez, Caicedo, and Lavia would be their best midfielders this season. But I don't think really Fernandez has done much. Don't think Caicedo's done much. And Lavia's been injured. And Gallagher's been their best midfielder. And this is someone who I think lots of people wouldn't have thought would really be that high in the pecking order at Chelsea. So I can see from a kind of financial perspective, I can see why it might make sense for Chelsea to sell him. The problem, I think, really is more political. It's that how do you think the Chelsea fans would react if they sold Gallagher to Tottenham? How do you think Pochettino would react if they sold Gallagher to Tottenham? I think I'm not sure politically the Chelsea hierarchy can afford to sell Gallagher. And my guess is that they have to take the risk. They have to take the risk of letting him go into his final year.
Right.
Even if that's going to hurt them financially, I think they have to take the risk, see if they can maybe get him to sign a new deal or sort something out in the summer. Clearly, I think Tottenham have got half an eye on the situation. I've always thought, I'm not sure it's really made sense for what Tottenham needs, or it doesn't really feel like a Tottenham-y type signing. But I don't know. I'm not. So I would bet against it happening. Although I think what it really comes down to is a kind of bit of a game of chicken between Gallagher and Chelsea. I think, and I think Tottenham are just waiting to see how that plays out. In terms of Højbjerg, well, I think it's tough. I've got a lot of sympathy for Højbjerg because he's always, whether you rate him as a player or not, he's always tried his best for Tottenham. He's very committed to being successful, and he wants to make the best of himself on the pitch. And it's been tough. He wants to be the main guy. He wants to be, a leader around the place and really involved. And this year he's barely played. And when he has played, I think when he comes on as a second half sub to try and see a game out, I think he's actually pretty good at that. I think when he starts, I think he struggles. I think he just doesn't really fit with the kind of profile that Ange wants in midfield. Yeah. And so I think we're not really seeing the best of Højbjerg this season. I think it's totally understandable and fair for him to want to go and play more football. Particularly, he'll know that it's the Euros coming up in the summer. He's not going to have he's been around for a few years. He's not going to have many more international tournaments with Denmark, and particularly with this generation of Denmark players like Christian Eriksen that he would have played with his whole career. So I think it's totally fair enough for him to want to go and play a bit more football before the Euros. But I think, again, a lot of this comes down to finance. It's like, what's the move for Højbjerg? I think hypothetically, if Tottenham got a really big, juicy offer for Højbjerg, maybe they'd let him go because they still have Bissouma, Bentancur, Sarr, Skip, and Maddison, plus Kulusevski and Lo Celso. But I'm not sure a big offer is going to come simply because the state of the sort of financial state of European football right now. So I think maybe I would bet on Højbjerg having to stay. I think if I had to bet, I'd bet on Højbjerg staying because I don't know where the bet's going to come in from. And also, I think I wouldn't be surprised if Tottenham think, well, you might well want to play Pierre, but we'd actually quite like you around the place. I'm not sure Tottenham could have. It's like he has played a lot recently, and I know that midfielders have been out, and I know Maddison will come back, and Sarr and Bissouma will come back, but Maddison just had a 3-month injury. Bentancur's had one bad injury last season, another injury this season. Sarr had that minor hamstring injury in his last game before African Nations. Bissouma's had spells in and out of this team, so it's very it's within the realms of possibility that some of these guys will get injured again, and they'll need Højbjerg again. So maybe Tottenham, maybe Tottenham would want to keep him. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think Gallagher, I would probably say, is unlikely to happen. I might regret saying that later. Whereas Højbjerg, I'd probably call maybe a bit more of a 50-50 situation. But the big question with Højbjerg is who comes in for him and with what money? Because I don't think Tottenham would let him go for nothing.
Do you think, Jack, very quickly on this, that if Spurs do get a offer they can't turn down for Højbjerg, they do let him go and then essentially don't bring in another midfielder? The reason I ask you that is I know obviously we've had a situation where they've been decimated with relation to suspensions, injuries, international absentees. But when you look at Spurs' midfield in general, they've got Sarr, they've got Bissouma, they've got Maddison, they've got Kulusevski players at 10 as well. I know not the same positions, but do you feel Spurs would definitively want an alternative to Højbjerg if they get a crazy offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they sold him, I think they probably would try and replace him. I don't think they would just pocket the money.
Right.
I
Okay.
think if they sold him, I think they would have a think about replacing him. I guess the question is, hypothetically, would they sell? Would they sell him and then try and get Gallagher? Would they then, try and put a bit of pressure on Chelsea with Gallagher for a
Yep.
bit? Obviously, Gallagher would be miles more expensive than Højbjerg. They're not
Yep.
going to get 50 million for Højbjerg, are they? They only
No.
paid 21 million for him, and that was in 2020. So coming up to, I think, coming up to 4 years ago. So they wouldn't get massive money for Højbjerg, but they might, they might try and look for someone like Gallagher, or they might think we just need another more experienced player, a body who can come in. But then if you're selling Højbjerg and then replacing him with a more experienced player who's not going to play all the games, you might as well just keep Højbjerg. There's no point in selling him and replacing him with someone similar.
Yeah.
Like if that's what you like, if you're not going to sell him and try and get someone different in, you might as well just keep him.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that's the one thing with Højbjerg, that I can't question his professionalism or his attitude or work rate or desire. But the problem is, I just don't feel he fits an Ange system. And I think that's the problem, that you're trying to gel a player and it just doesn't fit that way. And I think, you know what? Pierre, I think, will be great in Serie A, or whether he goes to La Liga. I think he'll play for a really good, I think he'll do very, very well wherever he goes. If it's the Eredivisie, I think he'll be a really good player wherever he goes. And I think, again, by the fact you hear certain links out there to the likes of Juventus, I mean, that tells you how much well-respected Pierre is. But I think, like you said there, Jack, the problem is, there's just not a huge amount of money going outside the Premier League for these players. And it's all about money. It's all about players that, again, are on the periphery at the moment. Does lead me to Brian Hill and Ryan Sessegnon. Now, Hill has had a fair bit of game time recently, which has come down to, really, as we've upon, the fact that Spurs have had a number of injuries. Ryan Sessegnon is just getting his way back in terms of a recent injury. So I just wonder, both of them, it feels, does need football. Can you see Spurs granting either the player the opportunity to leave the club in the next few days?
I think it would depend what sort of offers come in. I mean, I think, look, Sessegnon, it's been really tough for Ryan. He obviously missed 11 months out with injury. I think he's fit again at the moment. I gather he's looking really good in training, but I think long term, is his future going to be at Spurs? You guess probably not. I think he needs to build himself back up again with football. I think it would just depend on what was the right fit for him. What sort of a club was he looking to go to? With Hill, I mean, he's actually played a bit more than Ryan this year. He's started a few more games. Yeah. I think again, I'm not sure his long-term future is at Tottenham. I think that it probably sounds like a situation where it's time for him to leave, probably permanently, just because he's had loans before. He's obviously been at the club 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
So I think I don't know what the market is at the moment for these players. Like I said, there are almost literally no sales happening in European football right now, are there? Like,
no,
anywhere you look, teams are not buying players apart from Dragon's team. So I'd be surprised if Tottenham, clubs are ringing up Daniel Levy, offering him a lot of money for these guys at the moment. But let's wait and see. I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe a loan type situation would make a bit more sense the second half of the season, because ultimately it's in Tottenham's best interest that these guys are playing football.
Yeah. Again, you make that point there, that if they're not playing, their value is simply decreasing. So they do need to play football 100%. Jack, final question of the interrogation. A nice one, I think, to end it on, depending on how you view this one. I'm really just to know from you, Jack, what do you feel constitutes success for Spurs in Ange's first season? And no pressure, you are going to the FA Cup game against Man City, which could catapult this season into absolute delirium, depending on how that goes. I mean, give me your thoughts, Jack, on your feeling on what it would mean for success. And we've got to quickly touch upon that FA Cup game. You're going to be there.
So I think, as I said earlier in the show, I think success is not just measured in league position this season. I think success is measured in, is there a clear direction of travel? Is there a clear ethos? Is there a unity in the squad? Unity between the squad and the fans? And that's really, I think, what he had to be judged on this season. I think he's achieving that at the moment. I think Tottenham are heading in the right direction. I think there is that unity, there is that ethos. So I think, this is going to sound like I'm ducking the question, I think success in that sense has already been achieved. And I think that's more important than do they come 4th, 5th, 6th or 7th. But in terms of league position for this season, at the start of the season, I think I would have said I probably expected Spurs to come out about 6th, because I knew it's going to be really tough. Selling Kane, new manager in, big transitional year in terms of the players. having to sign half a new team, lose all the old guys and everything. But I think now that we're in this more than halfway through the season now, I think it's fair enough to say, well, actually, I think Spurs are in a better position than I thought they would be in. One, because Spurs, started the season really well, and since then they've continued to get decent results. But also because I think a lot of the teams around them are struggling. Like Man United are much worse than I was expecting them to be. Chelsea are much worse than I was expecting them to be. Newcastle are much worse than I expected them to be. So I think Spurs have got a better shot at top four than I thought they would have at the start of the season. Now, I think at the moment, I'd say City and Liverpool. It's like City and Liverpool are better than Tottenham, I think. Arsenal, probably, but it's kind of hard to get a read on Arsenal at the moment. They're obviously not firing all cylinders, but I do think it's plausible that Tottenham can get fourth. I think they can get fourth.
Okay.
I think it would be a big achievement if they did it, because I don't think anybody expects them to at the start of the season. But I think they can do it. I think they can get top four. Obviously, it'd be amazing if they won the FA Cup. I think everybody would love that. Personally, speaking purely from my own selfish perspective, I'd rather they got the FA Cup than Champions League, because as a journalist, like I've seen Tottenham play in the Champions League quite a lot now. I've never seen them win the FA Cup as a journalist. Last time Tottenham won the FA Cup, I was just before my third birthday. So
don't age yourself, Jack. Don't reveal it. Don't reveal it.
So from my perspective, if you're asking me what I'd rather Spurs won the cup, because I just think it'd be a great story, great for the fans, really good occasion at Wembley. But I think they can have a really successful season if they get fourth, as well as all the stuff that we talked about off the pitch.
Yeah, you know what, Jack? I mean, I'm very similar to you. Look, I'm very old school. I'm old romantic. I was named after Ricky Villa, right? So the FA Cup does hold a very much really big place in my heart, and I really want to see the club take that seriously. I'm intrigued to know what kind of rating chance did you give them, Jack, if they were to get past Man City? And bearing in mind, Jack, you followed this club when they've gone out of cup competitions, the likes of Colchester, Sheffield United, Nottingham Forest. I mean, in a way, is this a kind of cup tie Spurs need? Because the fact is that if they were to beat Man City, they're not only beating the holders, but the belief that would give them to go on in the latter stage of the competition. Do you feel that would really, really drive them on to believe we can do it?
Yeah, I mean, that Sheffield United game last year, I think will always haunt me. I think.
Oh my God! Yeah.
I can't think of many times I've covered Spurs. I've just been so angry at that ridiculously arrogant team selection, leaving out Kane, leaving out Romero, leaving out Kulusevski against a much changed Sheffield United team. I thought it was an absolute insult to all the fans that travelled. I thought it sent the worst possible message to the players. The players never looked on it. I thought Stellini's, it was not Stellini's fault because Conte would have been involved, but Stellini's answers about it in the press conference afterwards were really unsatisfactory. And it just left a really sour taste. And you could tell after that, like, the game was up really for Conte at that point. And it only lasted another few more weeks. So, yeah, I do think Tottenham need an occasion which demands they play. Like, they can't have an occasion where they've already got their excuses in. So I think that's good. Look, I think it's going to be really tough. I think City are looking really good at the moment. Particularly there's away wins against Everton and Newcastle in the last few weeks. I think there's like that ominous moment in the second half of the season where City really click into gear. And even though they weren't really on it fully in the first half of the season. So I think it will be difficult for Spurs. Of course they can win. They got a good draw at City in the league earlier in the season. This one's back at home. Spurs will have a stronger team out for this one than they did for the away league game. They've got a great record against City. City haven't even scored at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. No. I think it's going to be their 6th visit, I think. So of course, Tottenham can do it. I think it'll be tough. I wouldn't make them favourites. But if they do it, then they'll be in the 5th round of the FA Cup and there'll be no Manchester City and no Arsenal. So that means the only other team better than Tottenham left in it will be Liverpool. And I think Tottenham could beat Liverpool in a one-off game, or somebody else could beat Liverpool in a one-off game. Liverpool is still in Europe as well. So it's not like Liverpool will be... going and Liverpool are still in the League Cup, so it's not like the FA Cup will be Liverpool's only priority going into the second half of the season. So of course, if they do get it, it becomes a lot easier. But I'm not going. That doesn't mean that I think they're going to win on Friday because I think it's too early to say, or I think they're going to win the FA Cup because that's hard. But I definitely think there's reasons to be optimistic, and I also think one other point on this is I think the fans even if they don't win the cup, I'd love to see Tottenham just get to the semi-final, because I really feel in the last few years that the fans deserve a big day out at Wembley. Like, if you think about it, the League Cup final in 2021, that was during COVID. There were, 1,000 Tottenham fans there, I
That's
think.
right.
It wasn't really a
Right.
proper
Yes.
cup final experience.
Yeah.
Obviously, 2019 Champions League final, great trip. Not everybody can make it because it's in Madrid. It's expensive to get there, challenges with flights and accommodation, everything. Tons of Spurs fans went, and that's amazing. But obviously, Wembley is easier to get to than Madrid. And I know people will say, "Oh, but Tottenham played dozens of games at Wembley." When they were waiting for the new stadium, that's not the same. Like, it just
So
isn't. It's not the same. Like, everybody knew that by the second half of the 18-19 season, nobody was really enjoying being at Wembley anymore, were they?
No.
It was a long journey. It was like the attendances were starting to dwindle a bit. People were just excited about the new stadium. So Tottenham haven't had a proper day out at Wembley, I would argue, since the 2018 semi against Man United or the 2017 semi against Chelsea. That's 6 and 7 years ago now. So I do think that Tottenham fans deserve a big trip to Wembley. They haven't had a proper trip to Wembley for a long time. And I really hope if Tottenham can get through the City game, they can get that trip to Wembley in April or May.
Jack, you're getting us very, very excited. I think it's only right we leave it there, because it's been a fascinating hour with you. I could go on longer, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to have you back on the Spurs beat. I really genuinely mean that. We have missed you. We certainly have. Jack, where can everybody find your wonderful insights on Spurs? The community's missed you, Jack. Where can they find you?
Thank you, mate. That's very kind. It's great to be back in the community. So you can find me at Jack Pitt-Brooke on Twitter, where I post all my articles for the Athletic. And you can listen to me on The View from the Lane, the Athletics Tottenham podcast, which comes out twice a week and is with me, Danny Kelly, James Moore, and Charlie Eccleshare, all of whom I think you'll probably know. We do.
All lovely, lovely guys. Look, Jack, thank you so much. Lovely to have you back in amongst things, all things Spurs. Hopefully, just at the right time where things are really going to pick up. Look, been a pleasure. Guys, thank you so much for watching, for listening around the world. It's been a busy, busy time of year. Always a pleasure to have this man back with us. Look, for myself, from Jack, please keep safe, keep well. We'll be back with you soon. And as always,